The silent air of all the evening sky was painted in shades of soft orange and fading purple as the last rays of sunlight touched the tall gates of the Reed mansion. The house stood proudly on a hill, its many windows glowing faintly like golden eyes. To most people in the city, this mansion was a symbol of wealth, success, and power. But to Margaret Reed, the mother of the man who owned it, it was a place of distance, a place where her heart no longer felt at home. Margaret was not dressed like the mother of a billionaire. That night, she wore a plain gray dress, simple shoes, and carried only one old suitcase. A scarf covered her silver hair, and her hands, once used to soft embroidery, now clutched the handle of her bag tightly. She was not arriving as a guest, nor as the owner's mother. She was arriving as a maid. Her plan had been born out of worry and love. For months, she had seen the newspapers filled with stories of her son Alexander, his new business deals, his wealth, his expensive cars, and the glamorous women who appeared at his side. But behind all that glitter, Margaret sensed emptiness. Alexander was rich, yes, but was he loved? Was there someone who cared for his heart and not his fortune? Margaret wanted to know the truth, and to know the truth, she had to see life inside the mansion, not as a guest, not as a mother, but as a servant. Only then could she see people as they truly were. She entered through the servant's gate, her steps slow but steady. The guard barely gave her a second glance. To him, she was just another older woman hired to clean floors or wash dishes. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood, and fresh flowers arranged carefully in crystal vases. The mansion was breathtaking high, ceilings painted white, marble floors shining under the lights, and expensive art on every wall. But Margaret's heart was heavy. She remembered a time when her son lived in a small apartment, when his greatest treasure was a second-hand bookshelf filled with books he loved. Where is that boy now? She thought sadly. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, met her at the side hall. She was a strict-looking woman with sharp eyes, her hair tied back in a bun. "You must be Margaret," she said without warmth, "the new maid. We don't like mistakes here. Follow the rules, do your work, and you will have no problems." Margaret lowered her head humbly. "Yes, ma'am," she replied in a soft voice. She could not reveal who she truly was. Not yet. Mrs. Dawson led her to the servants' quarters. The hallways became narrower and less polished the deeper they went, far away from the golden chandeliers and the rich velvet curtains of the upper floors. Finally, she opened a small wooden door. Inside was a tiny room with a single bed, a narrow wardrobe, and one lamp that flickered weakly. The walls were bare, and the window was so small it barely let the moonlight in. Margaret placed her suitcase on the bed and sat down. The mattress was stiff, and the silence around her was heavy. She touched the scarf on her head and closed her eyes for a moment. In her memory, she saw her son as a boy running through a field with muddy shoes, laughing. As he chased butterflies, she heard his young voice calling, "Mama, look, I caught one." The memory was so sharp that tears welled in her eyes. Now he was a man, a billionaire, surrounded by wealth. But was he still that boy at heart? Did he still know the value of love, kindness, and honesty? Or had the glitter of gold blinded him? The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled her back to the present. Other maids walked by, whispering to each other, carrying baskets of laundry. She heard laughter in the distance from the dining hall, where the wealthy guest of her son enjoyed a feast. But here, in the corner of the mansion, there was only silence. Margaret touched her chest gently and whispered, "I will stay here. I will watch. I will listen, and I will find out the truth about love in this house." The night grew colder, and she pulled the thin blanket over herself. The wind outside brushed against the window, making a soft whistling sound. Margaret closed her eyes, her heart heavy but steady with determination. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. She would have to live the life of a servant, work hard, and remain unnoticed. But only in this way could she uncover what was hidden behind the shining walls of her son's fortune. The mansion glittered with wealth, but Margaret knew that true light came from love, and she was ready to search for it, even if it meant disguising herself in silence. The maids came the next morning. Sunlight crept slowly into Margaret's tiny window. It painted a pale square on the bare wall, reminding her that she was no longer in her warm home, but in the hidden corner of her son's mansion. She sat up on the stiff bed, her back aching, but her heart steady. Today she would begin her work as a maid. Today her disguise would be tested. The Carters outside were already alive with footsteps. The house smelled faintly of strong coffee. and buttered bread, carried from the grand kitchen where chefs prepared breakfast for Alexander and his guests. Margaret stepped out quietly, holding her cleaning cloths and a small bucket given to her the night before. The other maids passed her, whispering, laughing softly among themselves. Some gave her a curious glance, an older woman among mostly younger staff, but no one asked questions. She liked it that way. To remain unnoticed was her greatest shield. Her first task was in the east wing, dusting the guest rooms. As she walked through the hall, her eyes fell on the golden frames that lined the walls. Portraits of powerful men, famous landscapes, and expensive art filled every inch. Yet to Margaret, the walls seemed empty of warm thought. She began to clean slowly, carefully, her hands steady. Each swipe of her cloth stirred old memories. She remembered the small house where she and Alexander once lived, where the walls were covered, not with paintings, but with drawings her son made as a child, messy sketches of airplanes, stars, and stick figure superheroes. She smiled faintly at the memory, but her chest ached with longing. He had dreams, she whispered. But did those dreams cost him his heart? By late morning, she had moved to the main hall. The chandeliers sparkled above her, their crystals, catching the sunlight like frozen rain. She bent to polish the marble floors, her knees pressing into the cold surface. As she worked, voices echoed from the dining room nearby. It was Alexander. His deep, commanding voice carried through the air, confident and proud. The deal is final, he said. By next month, we will expand into Europe. Nothing can stop. U.S. guests clapped lightly, their laughter filling the room. Margaret froze in her place. Her hands shook as she pressed the cloth against the floor. She had not seen her son yet, not face to face, but hearing his voice pierced her like an arrow. She wanted to rush into the room, embrace him, call him my boy, but she couldn't. She was only the maid now. Her eyes blurred as tears tried to escape, but she forced them back. Not yet. I must stay hidden. I must see who is true to him and who only wants his gold. At noon, Margaret joined the servants for a quick meal. In the basement dining area, the long wooden table was crowded, the plates filled with plain food, bread, soup, and tea. She sat quietly at the end, listening. The other maids gossiped about Alexander's life. He has another guest tonight. One of them whispered, a young woman again. Another asked, yes, they say she's beautiful, but only here for his money, like the others. The maids laughed bitterly. One of them, a young girl named Clara, noticed Margaret sitting silently. Clara had soft brown eyes and a gentle smile. Don't worry, she said kindly. You'll get used to it here. Just keep your head low. Margaret nodded with a grateful smile. Something about Clara's warmth touched her heart. She seemed different, less bitter, more genuine. After lunch, Margaret returned to her duties. In the garden, she trimmed roses, their fragrance filling the air with sweetness. She remembered planting flowers with Alexander when he was little. He used to dig the soil with his small hands, dirt on his cheeks, laughter in his voice. Mama, one day I'll build you the biggest garden in the world, he had said proudly. Now, the garden was here, huge, colorful, perfect, but it was not built for her. It was built for guests, for strangers, for show. As the sun lowered in the sky, Margaret returned to her small room. She sat on the bed, her body tired but her mind restless. She thought about what she had seen, what she had heard. She thought about Alexander's voice, strong but lonely. She thought about Clara, whose kindness shone like a small candle in a dark room. Margaret pressed her hands together and whispered, I will find the truth. I will watch closely. Somewhere in this mansion, behind the riches and the power, love must be hiding, and I will uncover it. The night crept in, shadows stretching across the walls. The mansion glittered under the moon, but inside Margaret's tiny corner, there was silence. She lay down, listening to the distant laughter of the rich guests, her heart aching yet determined. For the first time since she arrived, she felt that maybe fate had brought her here not only to see her son, but also to discover the stories of those hidden in the shadows, the servants, the lonely, the unnoticed. Perhaps, through them, she would learn the shocking truth about love. And with that thought, Margaret closed her eyes. The first encounter of third morning came quietly, but the rain gave the mansion a softer mood. Tiny droplets clung to the tall glass windows, making the garden outside look blurred, as if seen through tears. The smell of damp earth and fresh roses floated in with the breeze, mixing with the sharp polish of marble floors. The mansion, so alive with wealth, felt strangely heavy, as though waiting for something unseen. Margaret woke early, her body aching from the stiff mattress, but her heart steady. She folded her blanket neatly and whispered to herself, "Today will be different. Today, I may see him." She tied her scarf tightly, picked up her cleaning cloth, and stepped into the wide corridor. Servants rushed past her carrying trays, flowers, and polished silverware. The air was filled with orders shouted by Mrs. Dawson, the head housekeeper. "Move faster. The master has important guests today. Everything must shine." Margaret's heart tightened at the word master. That was how they spoke of her son now. Not Alex, not even Mr. Reed, just the master. Her duty for the morning was to polish the main library. It was a grand room at the center of the mansion, filled with high wooden shelves that stretched toward the ceiling. Dust had gathered on the leather-bound books, and the air smelled of old paper, wood, and faint cigar smoke. Margaret ran her hand along the spines of the books, remembering the boy who once loved stories. Alexander had always been curious, always asking questions about the world. He used to sit by the fire as a child, his small fingers turning pages. Of old fairy tales now, this library was silent. The books looked untouched, like decorations, not treasures. Margaret was wiping the long wooden desk when the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Strong, steady, purposeful, her heart froze. She knew that rhythm. She had listened to those footsteps since the day he learned to walk. The door opened, and Alexander Reed entered. He was taller than she remembered, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark tailored suit that whispered of power. His face was sharp, handsome, and serious. His watch gleamed under the soft light, worth more than some people's homes. He carried himself with confidence, the kind that came from years of success and command. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to cry out, to run to him, to say, "My boy, it's me," but she couldn't. Her disguise was her shield. She bent her head quickly and lowered her eyes, just as a maid should. Alexander did not notice her at first. He walked to the desk, checking some papers left there. His voice broke the silence. "Tell Dawson this room is not ready. I asked for everything to be spotless." Margaret's hands trembled around her cloth, but she steadied herself and spoke in the softest tone. "I'm working on it, sir. It will be ready soon." The sound of her voice made Alexander pause. He turned his head and looked at her for the first time. His eyes, dark, sharp, and calculating, studied her face. For one tiny moment, something in him softened. She saw it, the flicker of recognition, like a shadow of memory. But then it was gone. "Good," he said simply, turning back to the desk. His tone was cold, professional, the way a man speaks to staff. "Make sure the windows are polished too. The guest will be here in an hour." "Yes, sir," Margaret whispered, her throat tight. He left the room quickly, his footsteps fading down the hall. Margaret stood frozen, her hands pressed to the cloth, her heart racing. She had seen him at last, spoken to him, yet remained invisible to him. To him, she was just another servant. Her eyes filled with tears she could no longer hold back. They spilled silently down her cheeks, dropping onto the polished wood. "You don't see me, my son," she whispered to the empty room, "but I see you, and I will not stop until I know if love still lives inside you." When the tears passed, she steadied herself again. She had to be strong. She had chosen this path, and it would test her more than she imagined. She picked up her cloth and continued to polish, each stroke a silent prayer for the boy she once knew. Later that afternoon, as she carried fresh flowers into the dining hall, she heard the other maids whisper again. "They say Mr. Reed never keeps anyone close," one said. "He doesn't trust love. He thinks everyone just wants his money." Another replied, "Maybe he's right." The first answered, "But that means he will always be alone." Margaret's chest tightened. Alone. The word echoed through her like thunder. She remembered Alexander as a child, running into her arms, laughing, begging her never to leave him alone. How strange life was that now, surrounded by riches. He was more alone than ever. That night, back in her small room, Margaret sat by her little window, watching the rain slide down the glass. She whispered to herself, "He looked at me, but he did not see me." Still, something stirred in his eyes. "I know it. I will find a way to reach his heart." And for the first time since her arrival, hope flickered inside her, small but steady, like a candle against the dark. Secrets in the Shadows mansion at night was not the same as the mansion by day. By daylight, it shone with wealth marble, floors reflecting sunlight, Glass chandeliers glowing like captured stars. Servants moving briskly with polished trays. But at night, when the guests were gone and the laughter faded, silence crept in like a shadow. Margaret lay on her narrow bed, unable to sleep. The thin blanket did little against the cool night air. But it was not the chill that kept her awake. It was the memory of her son's eyes. He had looked at her earlier in the library, just for a second. There had been a flicker of something familiar, something that almost recognized her. But then it was gone, swallowed by his mask of power. She whispered into the darkness, "He does not see me, but maybe the shadows will show me what the light hides." The sound of soft footsteps outside her door pulled her from her thoughts. Curious, she rose quietly and peeked into the hallway. There, moving swiftly with a tray of food covered by a cloth, was Claire, the young maid with kind brown eyes who had spoken to her before. But it was past midnight. Meals were long finished. Where was she going? Margaret followed silently, her bare feet making no sound against the wooden floor. Clara moved through the servants' passageways, narrow halls, hidden behind the grand walls of the mansion. At last, she stopped at a small side door and knocked gently. The door opened, and Margaret caught sight of a young man, one of the mansion's gardeners. His clothes were simple, his hands rough from work, but his smile at seeing Clara was tender, full of warmth. Clara handed him the tray. "You work so late in the rain. You'll fall sick if you don't eat," she whispered. The gardener's eyes softened. "And you'll fall in trouble if anyone finds out you snuck this for me." Clara smiled faintly. "Then we'll share the trouble." Margaret's heart stirred. Hidden in the shadows, she watched the exchange. There was the truth she had been searching for. Love. Not in the banquet hall with golden plates. Not in the contracts signed by rich men. But here, in the quiet corners, where a maid risked her job to bring soup to a gardener. It was pure, selfless, and real. She slipped away silently before they noticed her, her heart both heavy and light. Heavy, because her son lived among this love, but seemed blind to it. Light, because she now knew love still lived inside these walls. It only hid in the shadows. The next day, Margaret carried this secret with her as she worked. While dusting the grand stairway, she overheard the wealthy guests speaking as they descended. "Alexander is cold," one man said. "He doesn't believe in women, in romance, in anything but money." Who could blame him? The other replied, "Every woman who comes here sees his fortune first, not his heart." Margaret tightened her grip on the cloth. Each word pierced her. She remembered the little boy who used to sit by her bed and ask, "Mama, do you love me even if we have nothing?" She had always answered with a kiss and a smile. Always, "My son." Always. Now, he doubted love itself. That evening, Margaret found herself alone in the kitchen. The chefs had gone, and the silence was broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. She noticed a notebook on the counter, left open by mistake. It belonged to Clara. Curiosity tugged at her, but she hesitated. Reading it would be wrong. Yet, something in her heart urged her on. She glanced down at the page. The handwriting was neat, but simple. It was not about chores or lists. It was about dreams. Clara wrote of the gardener, his kindness, his honesty, how he made her laugh when the world felt heavy. But the last line struck Margaret like thunder. "Even if he never has gold, I would choose him, because his love feels richer than the whole mansion." Margaret closed the notebook quickly, her hands trembling. She pressed it back exactly where it had been and whispered, "This is the truth. This is what I must show him." Later that night, as she walked back to her room, she saw Alexander himself in the distance. He stood on the balcony, staring out at the rain-soaked garden, alone. His figure, tall and proud, was outlined by the moonlight, but there was no joy, no peace in his posture. His shoulders seemed heavy, his gaze distant. Margaret's chest ached. He had everything the world desired, yet he stood there as if he had nothing. She whispered into the shadows, "If only you could see love, my son. If only you could see it lives here, not in the gold, but in hearts like theirs." She knew then that her mission had deepened. It was not only about discovering the truth. It was about showing it to him. Somewhere in this mansion, in its quiet corners and whispered nights, lay the key to his heart. She only had to guide him toward it. And with that thought, Margaret closed her door, the shadows wrapping around her like a cloak. For in those shadows, secrets breathed in, love waited to be uncovered. The test of hearts following week, the mansion bloomed with activity once again. Cars with shiny black paint lined the driveway, engines humming like proud beasts. Guests in silk gowns and sharp suits drifted through the golden halls. Music floated softly from the grand piano in the corner of the drawing room, its notes wrapping the house in luxury. Margaret moved silently among the servants, carrying trays and polishing glasses. To them, she was just another maid, but in her heart, she watched everything like a mother and a judge, studying every smile, every gesture, every word spoken around her son. She was searching for the truth about who loved Alexander, and who only loved his wealth. That evening, she noticed a new guest, a young woman in a red dress, tall, graceful, with diamonds glittering at her ears. Her smile was wide, her laughter loud, and her eyes fixed firmly on Alexander. She leaned close to him as they spoke, her hand brushing his arm often, her gaze never leaving his face. Margaret's stomach tightened. She had seen women like this before in the papers, always at his side, always gone a month later, but something about this one was different. She was bolder, hungrier, her eyes sharp like a hawk watching its prey. At the servants' table later, Clara whispered, "Her name is Evelyn. People say she is after Mr. Reed's fortune. She boasts about it when she thinks no one is listening." Margaret's heart hardened. She would not allow such falsehood to steal her son's chance at love. She decided then she would test Evelyn, quietly, carefully, in the shadows. The next morning, Margaret was cleaning in the corridor when she saw Evelyn step out of Alexander's study. Evelyn's lips curled in a sly smile. As she slipped a small envelope into her handbag, Margaret lowered her eyes and continued dusting, but inside her heart raced. What was she hiding? Later, in the servants' hall, she found Clara again. Together, they passed near Evelyn's room. The woman had left her handbag on the table while speaking loudly on the phone. Margaret's hands trembled, but she forced herself to remain calm as she leaned closer. She did not open the bag. She would not betray herself, but she saw the corner of the envelope. Written on it in clear letters were the words, "Transfer details." Margaret's breath caught. She had no proof yet, but her instinct screamed Evelyn was planning to use Alexander. That night, when the guests gathered for dinner, Margaret observed closely. Evelyn laughed louder than anyone, praised Alexander in every word, and touched his hand with false sweetness. But Margaret saw her son's eyes. They were distant, unreadable. He smiled politely, but his gaze was cold, his shoulders stiff. He doesn't trust her, Margaret thought, but he doesn't trust anyone anymore. His heart is closed. She knew what she had to do. If Alexander could not see truth with his own eyes, she would have to show it to him. The chance came 2 days later. Alexander had called for a dinner in the private hall, inviting only a few close partners and Evelyn. The room glowed with candles, the table heavy with crystal glasses and silver cutlery. Margaret was assigned to serve wine. As she poured into Evelyn's glass, she leaned closer, her voice quiet but steady. "Be careful, miss. In this house, the walls listen, and secrets travel fast." Evelyn's eyes narrowed sharply, suspicion flashing. "What do you mean, old woman?" she hissed. Margaret lowered her head humbly, as if frightened. "Only that some people notice things others don't." Then she walked away without another word. Evelyn's face paled slightly. She shifted in her seat, her laughter turning more forced, her charm less smooth. Alexander, sitting beside her, noticed the change. He looked at her closely, for the first time truly studying the cracks in her mask. That night, long after the guests had gone, Margaret passed by the study again. She froze when she heard voices inside Alexander and Evelyn. "You said you loved me." Alexander's voice was low but cold. "But I've seen the documents. You wanted my money." There was silence. Then Evelyn's sharp tone. "Love cannot buy a house. Love cannot buy the world you live in. If I wanted your money, at least I was honest with myself. Can you say the same, Alexander? Do you even believe in love?" Her heels clicked angrily as she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She wanted to comfort him, to run inside and hold him as she once did when he was a boy. But she couldn't. She was still only a maid. Through the open door, she saw her son sitting alone at the desk, his face buried in his hands. His powerful figure seemed smaller, lonelier. Margaret whispered into the shadows, "My son, your heart is wounded, but love is still here, hidden in the corners, waiting. You must see it." She turned away, her steps heavy, but her spirit burning stronger than ever. The test had begun. Evelyn had failed. But the lesson was not yet complete. Alexander's heart was still locked. To open it, Margaret would have to guide him toward the truth about love she had already glimpsed in Clara and the gardener Dot, and so she prepared herself for the hardest part of her journey. The shocking truth revealed. Storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolled over the city, and thunder shook the sky like a drum. Rain poured heavily on the mansion's tall windows, making the lights inside flicker like trembling candles. The storm seemed to carry the same weight that hung over Alexander's heart. Margaret stood at the far end of the servants' corridor, listening to the storm and listening to her own soul. Weeks had passed since she had entered this house as a maid. She had seen the greed of false love, the quiet beauty of hidden love, and the loneliness that lived inside her son. She had come searching for the truth, and now the truth demanded to be revealed. That evening, Alexander had returned from a meeting, his face hard, his steps heavy. He went straight to the study and locked the door. The servants whispered that he had ended his ties with Evelyn and that his business deal had crumbled because of her schemes. He had lost millions. But Margaret knew the money wasn't what hurt him, it was betrayal. His heart, already shut, had been wounded deeper. Late into the night, Margaret saw the light still burning under his study door. She hesitated, her hands trembling. Should I go to him? Should I break my disguise? The storm outside roared, and something inside her whispered, yes, the time has come. She knocked softly. For a long moment, there was silence. Then his tired voice called, "Enter." Margaret pushed the door open. Alexander sat at his desk, surrounded by scattered papers and untouched whiskey. His face was pale with exhaustion, his eyes shadowed with pain. He looked up, annoyed at first, but when he saw it was the maid, his expression softened only slightly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice heavy. Margaret stepped forward, her scarf still covering her hair, her hands clasped. She wanted to speak, carefully, but her heart burst like a dam. "Sir, sometimes the people who seem the weakest are the ones who love you the most." Alexander frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Margaret's voice shook. "I'd have seen love in this house, hidden in the shadows, a maid who gives food to a gardener, not because of money, but because her heart is kind. That is real love. And I have seen you, sir, strong on the outside, but lonely inside. You push people away because you think love cannot be true, but it can." Alexander leaned back slowly, staring at her. Something in her words, something in her tone, pierced through him. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "How do you know this? Who are you to speak to me like this?" Margaret's breath trembled. The storm outside cracked like a whip. She reached for her scarf, fingers shaking, and pulled it away. Her silver hair tumbled down, and her eyes filled with tears. "I am not only your maid," she said softly. "I am your mother." The room fell into silence. So heavy it seemed even the rain stopped for a moment. Alexander's eyes widened, his lips parting in shock. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. What did you say?" Tears streamed down Margaret's face. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "It is me, Alex, the woman who held you when you were born, the one who kissed your scraped knees, who prayed for you when you were far away. I came here disguised because I needed to see the truth. I needed to know if anyone loved you for who you are, not for what you own." Alexander's breath quickened. His strong hands trembled as he whispered, Why would you do this? Why would you come like this, hiding from me?" Margaret's voice grew steadier, even as her tears fell. "Because you no longer let me close. Because the world around you blinds you with money and power. I feared you had lost faith in love, in kindness, in people. I needed to see with my own eyes what surrounded you, and now I know. You are surrounded by false love, but also by hidden love, real love. You only need to open your eyes." Alexander's chest rose and fell as he struggled with her words. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the study, another storm raged inside his heart. He stepped forward, his tall figure trembling, his eyes glistening. "You, all this time, it was you," he whispered. Margaret nodded. "Yes, my son. I was here, watching, waiting, loving you still." For a moment, he said nothing. His face twisted with anger, hurt, confusion. But then the mask broke, and he fell to his knees before her, his arms wrapped around her waist like he was that little boy again, clinging to his mother's dress. His voice cracked, raw with emotion. "Mother, forgive me. I was blind. I thought love was a lie. I thought no one could be true. But you came here for me. You still love me." Margaret bent down, her hands gently cradling his face, her tears mixing with his. "Always, my boy, always." They stayed like that, mother and son. The storm raging outside, but love shining inside. The mansion, once filled with empty glitter, now held something brighter truth, forgiveness. And love died as the thunder softened and the rain slowed. Alexander whispered, "Show me, mother. Show me how to see love again." Margaret smiled through her tears. "You already are, Alex. You already are." And for the first time in years, Alexander read Billionaire. Powerful, feared felt small again, felt human again, felt loved.